about them. And, it's like I use the analogy of believe it or not, I come from an Italian family, and and stereotypically, my dad was a what? Don't worry, you're not going to offend me. No. Okay, Joshua. That's funny, Joshua. No. What's the stereotypical job outside of the mafia for an Italian? You don't know? You guys have never seen My Cousin Vinny? Obviously, none of you have seen My Cousin Vinny. That's kind of sad. That's really sad if you've never seen My Cousin Vinny. Oh my goodness. Oh. All right, Marissa Tomei got an Oscar for it. No. Oh. Okay, you know what? Maybe I'll have a bonus question. Well, Deanna, you're close. She was an out-of-work hairdresser, but what was her rest of her brothers and her father and her uncles? No one? No one knows that? Oh, well. You guys are crazy. You're thinking of Mario Brothers. He was an auto mechanic. God, you guys need to watch My Cousin Vinny. Anyway, yeah. You guys never heard that stereotype? Yes, the mobster, the pizzeria, the bricklayer, but no, auto mechanic. What was my point? Well, like I said, I was raised in the garage, and it always kind of amazed me because my dad used to make a big deal about how most people just get in their car, turn the key and ignition on, and have no idea what's going on inside the car. And of course, that's almost everybody. That's everybody. All right. But like I said, I was raised in the garage. I helped rebuild engines and all that stuff. So it's kind of nice to know how your car actually worked. Jessica, you know what? I'm going to change the test. There's going to be a question from My Cousin Vinny, because it is a great movie. I've seen it like 50 times. And there'll be one extra bonus question about and I'll make it pretty obvious about My Cousin Vinny. So, okay, Andrea. I'm sure there's plenty of those too. Way back in the day, like I said, I'm very old compared to most of you folks, but way back in then, we used to have these huge family reunions. I mean, cousins, uncles, aunts, everybody come out of the woodwork. And my dad would say, stay away from that guy, that guy, that guy, that guy. And, I was like 12 or 13. I'm like, why? He goes, just stay away from him. And later on, I realized, so yes, I did have apparently some uncles that were in the mob. That was probably too much information. But anyway. All right. Here we go. So my whole point I would like to think that all of you, as part of your additional motivation to get to the careers that you want, is to know exactly how your body works. And like I said, when my healthcare provider, my doctor, he knows what I do for a living. So when I talk to him, we have a nice talk. I know what he's telling me, and we're on the same page. And I think the whole everybody in America should be able to talk to the doctor and not just sit there and nod your head and go, It's nice to know what your doctor is actually saying. That's what my point is. And probably the greatest thing that I love about teaching is when my students finally get to their eventual jobs or even in nursing school. But what I always loved is when students would sit there and they're now nurses or PAs or and they're listening to a conversation and they would email me back and say, "Oh my God, I understood what they were saying." And I'm like, yes, yes. That's the biggest compliment I can get is when my students come back and say, there was a conversation between a bunch of doctors and I literally understood what they were saying. So, yeah. Yes, but you're going to learn a lot of these big doctor words, Jessica. Okay, let's press on, shall we? And I will record. And we're on our way. You guys are too funny. A lot of comedians. So yeah, if the nursing thing doesn't work out for you, you should try the open mic at your local comedy club. All right. Here we go. All right, so we've covered this slide. Don't spend any time on this, folks. I'm not going to ask you any question about this. It's just a real quick thing is your body is amazing. And there's a lot of, intrinsic or local controls to ensure efficiency. So all this slide is saying that, you have air coming in and out, ventilation, you have blood flowing through the lungs, and you need to sync that up. That's all this slide is saying. You need to sync that up. You don't want to be breathing too fast and have low blood flow or high blood flow. And you can't see anything. Refresh. The rest of you can see stuff. Yeah. So again, I'm not going to really ask you about this test. I just think this is cool because again, this is just a local control between just your lungs and your capillaries, saying, "Hey, I want to make sure my blood flow is just right for my ventilation to be efficient." But I'm not going to ask you this question in the test. So let's just move on. So now we got to get the transport. Okay. So we got some numbers here. So O2 transport. The key here is 98% of your oxygen that you inhaled is bound to hemoglobin. And if you remember in our previous lecture way back when we talked about, you have 300 million molecules of hemoglobin per red blood cell, and you should have remembered you have 5 million red blood cells per microliter. And so, yeah, we're talking billions and billions of oxygen, but almost all of it. Only 2% is dissolved in the blood because, as we said, O2 doesn't like to dissolve in solution. Okay, so these numbers here, I don't think I have any question on the test about the numbers. This is more stuff that I used in my graduate work in exercise physiology. I just want you to appreciate how efficient you are. So literally per liter of blood, you're carrying 200 milliliters of oxygen. That is literally, do the math, 200,000, that's 20% of your volume of blood is carrying oxygen. Well, that's for males, and of course females is a little bit lower just because of the muscle mass and whatnot. But I don't have any question, I don't have any test questions about the carrying capacity, although you do need to know, you had that on your previous test, that these are the hemoglobin concentrations. All right, so once again, like I said, we have our hemoglobin molecule. Each molecule can carry 4 heme groups, and each heme group carries 1 molecule of oxygen. Now, how much is released when it gets to the tissues depends on the metabolic activity. So these things are all referring to your metabolic activity. I will say this a dozen times, and it'll be on your test, is one trip around the circulatory system through your tissues, only 70 to maybe 75% of the oxygen was unloaded. Think about that. So I hate that thing when they say veins carry deoxygenated blood and arteries carry oxygenated blood, because that's not a big difference. Like I said, when your blood returns to the vena cava, they're still saturated with 75% oxygen. All right. But again, these factors right here will determine whether you need to unload more oxygen. All right. So again, if you're exercising and you have a bigger demand for O2 and the temperature is going up, your pH is going down, your CO2 levels are rising, don't worry about this 2,3-diphosphoglyceride. I'm not going to ask you about that. That's more biochemistry. Then you're going to unload more oxygen because you have an oxygen demand. All right. That'll make more sense in just a second. So here, oh my gosh, what do we have here? A graph. What do we know about graphs? Very good, Andrea. It's on the test. I love graphs because I'm a scientist. That's right. And of course, and I probably said this, but in science, a graph is just like an artist where a picture is 1,000 words. All right. So you need to know this graph and be able to explain what's going on here. So this is a classic graph. It's called our hemoglobin saturation curve. You can see that we see this as, we call this sigmoid. Who knows what sigmoid means in science? If I have a sigmoid graph, anybody know what sigmoid means?
S-shaped.
Who said that? Who said that?
Me, Natalia.
All right.
You said that before, by the way.
Did I? Well,
Yeah.
good. So hopefully everybody will remember that. Gold star, Natalia. Very good. S means sigmoid. And that doesn't quite look like a sigmoid, but it's close enough for science. So what we're talking about here is I want you to pay attention to this graph. So on the x-axis, we have the partial pressure of oxygen. And on the y, we have the percent that your hemoglobin is saturated with oxygen. All those heme groups and all the O2 that's bound to the heme groups. So here, when we look at here, we see that at the alveoli, the partial pressure of oxygen is 100. We've covered that thoroughly. And you are 98% saturated. That's it. That's the max you can get in your body if you are healthy. All right. I cannot emphasize this enough. So whether you're in your yoga class or whatever, with all their breathing techniques, what's the whole purpose of breathing techniques in yoga? Very good. Exactly. To relax, calm the body. It has nothing to do with oxygen if you are healthy. All right. You're maxed out at 98%. Now, if you get one of these little oxymeters that you can get at CVS or Walgreens, and you put on, it's going to say 100%. Why do you think they make it 100%? Very good, Joshua. You just nailed it to make you feel better. Because if they made it 98%, you're like, oh my gosh, there's something wrong. But in reality, 98% is it. All right. Again, the other 2% is in the plasma dissolved. All right. Now, what makes this graph interesting? Yeah, exactly. Is we say it's a little bit sigmoidal because it stays high, even though the partial pressures are dropping and dropping and dropping. So if you look here, we're at 70%, and this is going to be a test question. At 70%, you're still 90% or better saturated. So you're fine. You're fine. What does this allow you to do, somebody? I know this is probably a little stretch. I think I talked about this one. Did we not talk about emos at Pikes Peak and whatnot? Okay. So what's the benefit of this staying high, even though my partial pressure has dropped to 70? I can do what? I can survive at altitude if I'm not smoking. Does everybody get what I'm saying here? Like those emo guys, they would have been fine until they started smoking cigarettes. All right. So yeah, so this allows us to survive at ground level all the way to 10,000 feet without too much of an issue. But if the altitude goes higher, or I have some sort of disease and my partial pressure starts dropping, it just starts swooping down. So you are going to have serious problems if your O2 saturation gets below 70. All right. Because now you're going to actually feel it. You're going to feel really bad. All right. And then, and here's the other important concept here. So at the partial pressure of oxygen at 40, I'm at 75%. All right. I know a lot of you don't have a whole lot of graph experience, but can anybody tell me what this means? So my PO2 at 100 was 98. My PO2 at 40 is 75. What does that mean? Can anybody tell me what that means? Again, we're talking about how much oxygen is bound to hemoglobin. What does this drop mean here from 100 to 40? This is highly testable stuff. Yes, Christine, less O2 bound. It means I unloaded oxygen, right? This is where I'm trying to pull this all together. So this is my O2 level, hemoglobin saturation in my lungs. When I get to the tissues, it's at 75. Do the math. How much did I unload? I was at 98, leaving the lungs. It's now at 75. Come on, do the math. Well, okay. Okay, very good, Deani, Natalia. Yeah, I unloaded 23% of the oxygen. So that's what I'm trying to get at, is when your blood flows through your tissues, it only unloads 23 to 25% of the oxygen. So when it goes back to the heart, it's still 70 to 75% bound of oxygen. All right. Any questions with this? And of course, this is my little favorite anecdote, my personal experience. So this is not testable. I just thought you'd find this interesting. I'm probably the worst patient ever because I know a lot about A&P. So many, many years ago, I was like 40 years ago, I was 40 years old, and I had a freak thing happened. I got pneumonia, and I'm talking about hardcore pneumonia. I had gone out for a run, a simple 5K run, and it was a good run. And then several hours later after the run, I felt really bad, and I was like, oh gosh, I don't know what's going on. I feel horrible. And so I went to bed early, probably like 8 or 9 o'clock. And then about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and I feel like I had a spear going through my heart. I was like, oh my freaking God, I'm having a heart attack. It was that painful. And And yeah, and I was like 42. I was like, are you kidding me? And yeah, so somebody already died, already figured that out. Deani did. So I I've only dialed 911 one time in my entire life, and that was on myself. All right. And I dialed 911 and I literally said, I think I'm having a heart attack. And so the ambulance came and took me to the hospital and they did the EKG on me and they're like, your heart is fine. And then they took x-rays of my lungs and holy crap, my whole left lung was filled with fluid, the whole thing. And I was like, how the heck does that happen? I talked to the to the pulmonologist, and I'm like, how does that happen? I'm healthy. He goes, you just got some nasty strain, super nasty strain of streptococcus. I don't know. You guys haven't had micro, and it just took over. It just took over like a wildfire. And yeah, you haven't had pneumonia until you've had real pneumonia where you literally feel like you're dying. You feel like you're dying. So anyway, so I'm in the hospital. No, I was not sick before the run. I felt great. I went for a 5K run, and it was a good 5K run. So it just kind of happened out of nowhere, and it's freaky, and it was a profound change. Bukola, do you have a question?
Yeah, yes, sir. Um, I'm using my phone. My Wi-Fi is bad, so I'm kind of typing wrongly. So I have a question. You said for hemoglobin, for ME make the right red blood cell, right? Hello, are you
Say
there?
that again.
Okay. Can you explain the 23 again? I don't see my Wi-Fi is bad. I'm using my phone, so it's bad, right?
It's very simple. All right. When the blood leaves your lungs, it's 98% saturated. When it gets to the tissues, it's down to 75% saturated, meaning 23% of the oxygen was unloaded to the tissues. Yeah, 98 minus 75 gives you 23. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. Thank you.
Okay. So again, to wrap up the story. So yeah, so I was in the hospital and I had a lot of epiphanies and revelations about how the fact that if I had this before antibiotics, I would have been dead. Who knows what year we came up with antibiotics? Anybody know? This is just trivia, but I think you just a long time ago. Well, for some of us. So, oh,
I
come
think
on,
it's the
Dan.
70s, right?
No, it's not the 70s. Good gosh. We had antibiotics before the 70s. So no, antibiotics were first used in the beginning of penicillin was the first one. No, Jessica, gosh, not that long. No. Okay. Christina comes up with 1928. That's when we kind of discovered before that was actually used on people and patient was the beginning of 1940. All right. All right. That's not that important because that's a gee whiz thing. But before World War II, before that, we did not have antibiotics. So anyway, my point is if I would have had this previous to 1940, I would have been dead. Dead. Again, this is all gee whiz stuff. You would have died. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. If you had one in 1945, you would have been dead too. All right. So my point is of all of this. So I'm in the hospital. I'm a physiologist. I kind of know all the people in the hospital because they're friends of mine. I was still in the military. So I knew all the nurses and doctors. And again, I was a physiologist. So there I am. I'm on oxygen, not a ventilator, but a cannula that was feeding me extra oxygen because of everything we just discussed. My whole left lung was filled with fluid. I'm surviving in my right lung. So I need supplemental oxygen. 21% isn't going to hack it. All right. So I have the cannula stuck up my nose, and I'm breathing in 100% oxygen. And so after the second day, I'm feeling a little bit better. I'm on pain meds. I got antibiotics. I got oxygen. So now I start experimenting. So I'm sitting there looking at the machines and the oximeter that tells you what your percentage is. And remember, it's supposed to be 98%. So what did Captain Fofi do? Okay. I took the cannula out. I just let's see what happens. And so I took the cannula that was feeding me 100% oxygen out of my nose, and I just watched the oximeter go from 98 to 90 to 80 to 75. I was just playing chicken, and so I waited for it to get down to 70%, and then yes. So I waited for it to get down right below 70%, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm feeling this. And then I would put it back in and watch it go back up. So I did this a couple of times until one of my nursing friends came in there and like, Jesus criminy, Rick, what? Yeah, exactly, till the alarm went off. So one of the nurses who I knew socially, she's like, what in the heck are you doing? And I just wanted to see. Anyway, so I thought you guys would appreciate that story. So that extra oxygen makes all the difference. All right, so, and again, to dispel any other stupid things, if you're healthy, you can't do better than 98%. So no matter, and this is on one of your test questions, so breathing faster and harder is not going to change your oxygen level. Did everybody get what I just said? All right. So breathing deeper, breathing faster doesn't change. Once you're saturated, you're saturated. All right. So when you take your yoga class, if the instructor said, we want to ensure that you have plenty of oxygen, and like, no, you're doing that just for the relaxation state. Yeah. And Christina, in fact, if you breathe faster and harder, you're going to get hyperventilate for the opposite reasons. And I want to emphasize that, and I will a couple times. If you breathe faster and harder, your oxygen levels do not change, but your CO2 levels do. You lose CO2, and that makes you lightheaded, as Christina observed here. All right, and those stupid things back, I don't think those exist. How many remember the oxygen bars where you would go and you could breathe extra oxygen? Yeah. Those, Christina, okay, Christina, you're kind of scaring me. Christina, because that's the last time I saw one. Did I tell you guys I am from Las Vegas, that I was raised in Las Vegas from kindergarten to high school? Did I mention that? From kindergarten to high school, I was raised in Las Vegas. So my dad was teaching me how to play poker and blackjack when I was like 8. Exactly, Danielle. That probably explains a lot of things about me. But and I go every year. I go home to see my parents, and they're like, "Oh, you're gonna go party?" And I'm like, "No, I'm gonna go home and fix up the house for my parents." And yes, Joshua, I'm very intuitive of you. I was stationed at Nellis Air Force Base, as was my dad. For those that you don't know, we have a very large Air Force Base in Las Vegas. In fact, we have the equivalent of what you have seen in the movies with Top Gun. So the Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas is the Air Force's Top Gun base. Okay, cool. All right, Joshua. Yeah, so we have our version of Top Gun. Actually, ours was first. Top Gun for the Navy came after. But yeah, Nellis has their Top Gun out there. And I was stationed out there. Anyway, we need to move on, folks. All right. Okay. So a couple things, like I emphasized here, only 20 to 25% of oxygen is unloaded. Again, this is when we're resting and relaxing, okay? It changes dramatically. This is a very important slide right here. All right, folks? So this is what we call the right shift, which means when you're exercising or working hard, your hemoglobin saturation curve shifts. And it doesn't matter which one you look like. One of these will be on your test. All right. Let's look at the middle one. That's easy. What? You like the colors. Okay. So I want you to understand what's going on here. So in the middle, the pretty color here is when your body temperature is normal, 37 degrees Celsius. That's equivalent to 98.6, which you should know. All right. And again, we don't care about the left shift because that's just a very extreme thing. We're only concerned about the right shift. So I'm exercising, my body temperature drops or increases to 43 degrees. My hemoglobin concentration curve shifts. What's the significance of that? Well, let's expand this, shall we, if I can. I don't know if I can. I don't know. They're just going to go elongated, so that doesn't work. But again, I want you guys to understand how to read a graph. All right. So see how it's shifted here to the right from what it would be normally. What's important here is the PO2 level at the tissue, which is normally 40. Everybody following me so far? And now at the PO2 of 40, let's go straight up our graph till we intersect the line. Everybody see my cursor? That's where we intersect the line. And then we go across. And what does that tell you? Very good, Andrea. Very good, Christina. All right. So what you should gather from that is I unloaded an additional 23% of oxygen because I need it. I'm exercising. Does everybody get that? So one more time, and it doesn't matter which one. We can go to CO2. If I'm exercising, my CO2 levels are increasing through aerobic respiration. And so instead of 40, here's my normal one in the middle. So now my PCO2 is 80. And once again, if I go to the tissue level, which is normally 40, and I go straight up, boom, you see it's at 50. Again, meaning I unloaded an additional amount of oxygen because I need it. That is called the Bohr effect. That'll be on your test. Write that down. So when my pH level drops, my CO2 level increases, my temperature goes up, I unload more oxygen. That's called the Bohr effect. That's called the Bohr effect. Bohr was one of the founding fathers of exercise physiology. I studied Bohr quite a bit in graduate school. Don't worry about DPG. I'm not going to ask you about DBG. All right. And again, this is kind of a thing that you would see in nursing programs where you have a situation where, hey, it's supposed to be at 98%. It's not. It's at 80. What's the problem? So again, this is just kind of a summary of everything that we've talked about. So why am I not at 98%? Well, let's look at the things that we've already discussed in this course. How's my hemoglobin concentration? Is the hemoglobin concentration where it's supposed to be? I expect you to know that. So it should be somewhere around what? 15 grams per deciliter? How's my red blood cell levels? Am I anemic? or not? So let's say my hemoglobin is right where it should be. My red blood cell count is right where it should be at 5,000. We can look at, what's my environmental things within the body, my CO2 levels, pH, everything that we just talked about. Hey, this all looks good. Let's go over here. All right. Again, what's the composition of the air I'm breathing? Am I at altitude or not? Alveolar ventilation. How's my lungs doing? My airway resistance, COPD, if you will, emphysema, my rate and depth of breathing. All right. Over on this side, how's the diffusion? And again, of course, this is where COVID comes in. Surface area, diffusion distance. And what we mean by diffusion distance is how much fluid is in my lungs. Or, do I have mucus in there? Does anybody know the disease where you have this extra mucus in your lungs, which is a horrible disease? I can't imagine how horrible that must be when you have extra mucus in your lungs. It's a genetic defect. Nobody? Okay, Vanessa gets a gold star. Congratulations, Vanessa. Cystic fibrosis. That has to be I went to a seminar, and I can't imagine how horrible that is, because everything that you've learned tonight, instead of fluid, it's mucus, which is even worse in terms of diffusing across the membranes to get to the capillaries. All right. So again, this is just one of those things that you will see, because what we call this is the process of elimination. All right, we got a problem with our O2 thing, and these are the variables that we have to look at. All right, we're moving on. So again, carbon dioxide, we have to get that out. Again, carbon dioxide likes to bind with oxygen and create carbonic acid. So we have to get rid of it. So 7 to 10% are dissolved in the plasma because it easily is soluble. We have 20% that is bound to the red blood cells. I'll explain that in a second. But most of it is what we call just carried through bicarbonate ion. So here's the slide that will be on your test. You need to know this reaction. And I've written it down, and I covered that already. All right. So most of the CO2 that your cells produce through aerobic respiration will react with water, produce carbonic acid. It will dissociate into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate. We have to get rid of this bicarbonate. All right. And here's a pretty slide. It looks pretty busy. But let's just talk you through it real quick. So the cells are producing CO2 through the aerobic respiration. CO2 diffuses over from high to low, 7 to 10, and this is part of your big essay question. Mark it. That's your essay question. All right. So 7 to 10% will be dissolved in the plasma. 20%, and again, this is something you probably didn't know, but the heme groups that unload the oxygen can immediately pick up the CO2. So we think of hemoglobin as just transporting oxygen, but they can also transport CO2 if the site is available. So when CO2 binds with an available site on hemoglobin, it can transport it. We call that carbaminohemoglobin. I like that name, carbaminohemoglobin. All right. But by far, most of it is the reaction of CO2 and H2O to give us the carbonic acid. So then we have the hydrogen ion and the bicarbonate. The hydrogen ion will be bound. That's part of our buffer system that we'll talk about later on. All right. We got to bind that hydrogen ion so it doesn't cause problems with our pH. So a lot of it will be bound to proteins. It can be bound to hemoglobin because hemoglobin is a protein. It can be bound to plasma proteins, but we bind that hydrogen ion just temporarily, and then we transport the bicarbonate to the lungs. Now we're at the lungs. What changed? Somebody tell me, what's the only thing on this slide that changed compared to the previous slide? Come on. All right, I wanted a simple, okay, Christina got it. The arrows, they just went in the opposite direction, all right? Because again, we have high CO2 in the blood, low in the alveoli, so the arrows just changed in the opposite direction. That's it. That's it. All right. Do not worry about the chloride shift. I'm not going to ask you anything about the chloride shift. All right. That's about the electrochemical balance of making sure you have the same number of ions on one side or the other. We don't care about that. Don't worry about the chloride shift. Okay. All right. Real quick, the Haldane effect is a no-brainer. It just says, hey, if you unload more oxygen, you can pick up more CO2. No duh. All right. So once again, the oxygen that leaves the heme group can pick up a CO2. All right. So this will be on your test, and this is what you're going to tell me. So I unload more O2 because of pH, CO2, temperature. That's Bohr. Haldane says, well, if you unloaded more O2, you can pick up more CO2. Okay, simple. Like think of like a taxi. All right, you unload passengers, you can pick up more. Okay, these slides I don't want you to worry about. I'm not going to ask you anything really about this other than the dorsal respiratory group. We're talking about the medulla. The medulla controls your respiratory centers to a degree, and the only thing you need to know is for most of us, your normal breath or respiratory rate, as we say, is 12 to 20. All right. That's the most important thing. The ventral respiratory group is when you voluntarily decide you're going to blow up that balloon or blow out the candles in your birthday cake. Don't worry about this. I'm not going to ask you. This is extra information that is kind of, frankly, is above and beyond this course. But you have the pons, and it just kind of makes your breathing rate nice and smooth, transition from inhaling and exhaling. We don't really care about that. Okay, it's simple. And again, like I said, your medulla keeps you at 12 to 20 breaths per minute, but it's getting information that can accelerate it or inhibit it. Most of the time it's accelerating. So when you're exercising, it's going to get the medulla to speed up your breathing rate. That should make perfect sense to you. If your O2 levels are too low, your CO2 levels are too high, again, it's going to increase your breathing rate. All right? Don't worry about the negative things. Those are a rare thing. Okay. Yeah, blow this slide off. Mark that off. This one, on the other hand, you do need to know. This will be a test question. All right. It's one of those big picture things I like to talk about. Now, you didn't have me for AMP1, but the blood-brain barrier isn't really a barrier per se. It just means you have capillaries that don't let anything into the brain that is not necessary. That's what the blood-brain barrier means. So it doesn't let any chemicals, unless they're lipid soluble, but it doesn't let hormones or neurotransmitters. It does not let anything into the brain. But it cannot stop CO2 because that can go through the phospholipid bilayer. Hydrogen ions can't go in there because they're ions. And hopefully we all know that ions cannot go through the phospholipid bilayer unless there's a channel. All right. So CO2 can go, and there's our famous reaction again. CO2 plus H2O gives me carbonic acid. Well, you have receptors in the medulla that pick up increased levels of CO2 and increased levels of hydrogen ions. Now, the artist combined this. There would be different receptors for CO2 and hydrogen ions, but they just made it convenient to save some space. But the CO2 and the hydrogen ions bind to receptors that trigger and stimulate the respiratory control centers in the medulla and increase the breathing rate to get rid of that CO2. Got to get rid of that CO2. Don't want to change your pH level. This is also an important slide. So again, O2, CO2 will go right through any membrane. And when you have cells, the baroreceptors in the carotid and aortic arteries, they're called glomus cells. That's not super important to some degree. But again, they will detect low O2, low pH, high CO2, meaning we need to breathe faster. So this is one of those classic things that we talked about, where we open up the potassium channels and we close them. And we have, and this is just the old-fashioned, no, we're not going to worry about it. This is your IP3. But the bottom, what you need to get out of this is focus on the O2. When O2 levels are low, these glomus cells are going to allow calcium in. They're going to release a neurotransmitter. Look, it's our friend dopamine. So once again, it's just an example of dopamine has many, many functions. And the dopamine is, once again, going to accelerate our breathing rate. All right. The most important thing out of this slide is these cells suck in terms of setting an alarm for low O2 levels. All right. You're hurting. 60 millimeters, you're in bad shape already before these glomus cells tell your lungs and your medulla to breathe faster and deeper. So they're really poor, really poor. And I'm going to show you a very cool videotape to explain that. And this is just a summary slide of what we just covered. All right. So again, these are the things that you respond to in terms of O2 and CO2 level. But on your test, CO2 is way more important than O2. CO2, just like we talked about holding your breath, all right? So when you hyperventilate, you're getting rid of a lot of CO2, all right? And you would do this if you had acidosis, if your pH was too low. So if your pH is too low, for whatever reason, you're going to breathe faster to get rid of the CO2 so it doesn't make carbonic acid. If your CO2 levels are too low, you're going to hypoventilate and keep as much CO2 as you can to get you back. And this would be a response to alkalosis when your pH is too high. And we will cover that later on when we talk about your pH balance. All right? And this is just a gee whiz thing. So a lot of your sleep apnea is because your CO2 levels are too low. So you literally stop breathing until your CO2 levels rise. All right. So again, I can't emphasize this enough. Your receptors for oxygen don't work until it's pretty low. It's pretty low. That's all I want you to get out of that. So CO2 is everything, everything. All right. So again, when your CO2 levels change, your pH changes, and then you have to respond. All right. And of course, the biggest concern is acidosis. Alkalosis is usually self-inflicted, and I'll explain that later on. But acidosis is, your lungs aren't working well, you're not ventilating well, you're not getting rid of the CO2. So it's, again, binding to oxygen and creating carbonic acid. Lactic acid from, again, exercise. Fatty acids, again, ketoacidosis when we're not able to use glucose, so we have to use fats. All right. So acidosis is always a problem, and that will affect your breathing rate. And this is just a summary slide. And that's it, folks. So your GWAS question before we watch a really cool little video that I think you'll like is, what's the purpose of yawning after everything I've taught you. What's the purpose of yawning? Christina just threw that out there. Oh, that's clever, Andy. That's very clever. What did I, Christina? I just explained to you. If you're sitting there, no. How is yawning increasing CO2? And you'll have to do a thesis paper on that. No. And again, remember, Christina, you're sitting there listening to me talk. What's your O2 levels? Assuming you're healthy. Yeah. Yeah. So is yawning going to change that? Yeah. Right. So it's kind of a trick question. We don't know why you yawn. Nobody does. But it certainly doesn't have anything to do with O2 levels. If your O2 levels were low, what would you be doing? All right. Just to impress me that you learned a lot today, if your O2 levels dropped, what would you be doing? I'll consider it. Panicking. There you go. Very good, Christina. You would start breathing faster. You guys are hilarious. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to show you a cool video of what I used to do in the Air Force, because I think you guys like that. All right. So, I was in charge of centrifuge training and making sure that fighter pilots could do 9Gs, but I was also in charge of making sure they could deal with high altitude. All right. So we're going to watch a cool video. The emphasis here is how important your CO2 versus your O2 receptors are. So are you guys ready? And this is one of the fun things that I got to do in the military. And I think this will probably, if you were freaked out by the centrifuge tapes, you're going to freak out. You're going to freak out with this. This is even worse, I think, to some degree. It depends on where you're at. Okay, so let me get this set up real quick to watch. So what you're going to see, and this is an old video. I've been retired for 17 years, and I think I made this 20-something years, and this is kind of a homemade video. What I mean by that is just my crew was videotaping this through the windows that they could watch. All right, so hang on, and I'll explain a little bit more. More of you should have little pics like Andrea's. She's got her cute little dog. What is that dog, Andrea? You should put up a little pic of yourselves doing something. Andrea has a cute. Deanna doesn't know how you can change your profile picture. Yeah. That helps me because God, I vaguely remember faces. It's been so long, but I like Andrea's because she's got her dog. What's your dog's name? Okay, cool. All right. Okay, so yeah, Christina helped somebody, but yeah, I like that. Christina has hers. We only have half her face. I don't know what's going on there, but it's pretty easy to change your profile pic. I'm sorry to hear that. All right, so here we go. Let me set this up for you. So hopefully you guys can see this, right? All right, so one of my jobs, and now this is going to freak out some of you, one of my jobs in the Air Force was to train pilots of how to deal with hypoxia. Now, you've heard that term a little before, but this is the lack of oxygen, which is obviously what happens when you go to high altitude or space. So what the military does is we pile up a handful of guys, not too many, into a giant steel concrete box, and we suck the air out of it. Simulating sounds like fun. We suck the air out of it, simulating that they are at high altitude. And then we do some extreme things to them. So I have to give you some of the terminology. So this guy's mask is down, as you see. It's dropped. And I'm pretty sure I talked about this before with the first Top Gun and the last Top Gun in Independence Day. When do you drop your mask in an aircraft? Very good, Joshua. But well, again, we want them to experience the effects of hypoxia. So you would never drop your mask, ever. You know, Hollywood, you know, you got to see Tom Cruise, you got to see his face and all the other folks, but you would never, ever drop your mask. Also, over here, where, let me go, hold on a second. Over here, you'll see this guy has his hands on what we call an oxygen regulator. That is a pretty cool thing. You can change the percentage of oxygen that you're getting. If you gang load it, that means you flip it up all the way up to the top, it gives you 100% oxygen. There's also another switch that will deliver pressure, everything that we've talked about today. So if you were in a world of hurt, you would gang load, as we say. And there are several other switches that aren't that really important, but you want 100% oxygen and you want it under pressure and you want your mask on if you feel like you're hypoxic. If you don't correct, then I'm not sure what that means, Dion. I changed it to my doggy. But anyway, okay. But if you don't correct, then you're going to succumb to hypoxia. And you're going to get insufficient O2 levels to your brain, and you're going to lose what we call useful consciousness. You're still awake, as you're going to see in this video, but you are oblivious. And this has killed many pilots through history before we understood hypoxia, where pilots would talk to the air traffic control or whatever, or their wingmen, and they sounded like they were okay, and then they would fly into the ground because they were hypoxic, but they weren't completely unconscious yet.
Is that similar to like when people drink too much and black out and they're still functioning, yet they don't have any memory of it?
That's good, Andy. Yeah, because that's one of the things it's funny you should mention that, Andy, because there are times when I was teaching this class, because hypoxia affects people differently. Some people, it feels good, like this guy is going to feel good. Other people, they're going to feel dizzy. Other people, they're going to feel like that you had that one shot of tequila that you shouldn't have had. Does everybody get where I'm coming from? that extra shot where you're like, oh gosh. And that's actually the best response is having that I had one too many shots of tequila. But for others, they go right past that. So yeah, it's very similar. It's very similar. And I think this is going to blow your mind a little bit. All right. So terms you need to know. We want him to gang load his regulator, so he's getting oxygen, 100% oxygen, and it's going to be under pressure. We want his mask to be on. He doesn't do any of these things. And again, this was training, so he failed, just to let you know. All right. And I'm in here. Most of the people are on the outside. I was the aerospace physiologist, so I had to be on the inside. And some of the audio is garbled. Somebody's mic didn't work. Like I said, this is not a Hollywood movie. You're only going to hear me when I say my famous words that you've heard me say quite often. You're going to die. Okay, you ready? And one more thing is, so what we do is we want them to be in the worst case scenario. So his regulator's off. He's not getting oxygen. His mask is down, no pressure. And we give him a simple task, and that is to show everybody this card and identify the card. Sounds simple. Watch what happens.
Nine of hearts.
And as you feel your symptoms, go ahead and let us know what they are.
Six of spades. I feel really good right now. Six of spades. No symptoms yet. Two of hearts. Two of hearts.
You have a little air hunger?
Do you have any air hunger?
I have tingling in my toes and in my toe. What was the last card, sir?
What was the last card?
Four of spades. Tingling in the toes right now.
Look at that card again. I don't think that was a spade.
Okay, real quick. Tingling of the toes. At this point, per the training, once you have tingling of the toes, you need to get on oxygen. He ignored that. And as you heard, he said he's feeling pretty good right now. But pay attention to the cards and what he says.
Four of spades.
What is that for?
Four of spades. Four of spades.
You sure? Where's that card?
He's now a goner, folks. If he was in an aircraft, he would be dead.
What is it?
What are you feeling right now, number 14?
Five of spades. Five of spades.
There we go.
What are you feeling, sir?
Four of spades. Four of spades.
What is it? What's your symptoms, sir?
What are you feeling, number 14?
Four of spades. Four of spades.
What's your symptoms, sir?
Four of spades. Four of spades right now.
What would you do if you thought this in the aircraft? What card is that, sir?
This is four of spades.
So what would you do if you thought this in the aircraft?
Four of spades. Four of spades right now.
Can you get right the regulator, sir?
Sure.
Show us what you would do if you were feeling like this in the aircraft.
What would you do right now, sir, if you was in the aircraft? 14, sir.
Sir, why don't you go with your regulator? Gabriel said you're gonna die. Sir, gang load your regulator.
That's me. You're going to die.
Go ahead and gang load your regulator, sir.
Gabriel said Come you're on, gonna sir, die. gang load.
Gang load your regulator.
Sir, you are gonna crash and die. Gang load your regulator.
14, sir. Go ahead and gang load. 14, sir.
No, if you don't gang load, you're gonna die. Athlete. Not that one, athlete, sir. This is sir. Sir. What's your next foot? Are you sure that's not four of spades?
It's a jack of diamonds.
Okay, sir, you can stop now.
So as you can see, total amnesia. He had no idea what he just experienced. That's why we videotape it. But you notice how fast, once he got the oxygen and the pressure, he snapped right back like nothing ever happened. Now, where this applies to you folks is, remember what we were talking about. He can still breathe. So his CO2 levels are perfectly normal because he's producing CO2 and he's easily able to exhale. So that's not a problem. That's not going to set off any bells and whistles in the hypothalamus. And as I said earlier, the gloma cells for detecting low levels of O2 are poor. They don't work very well. And as somebody put, it's a quick transition from I'm okay, feeling pretty good right now, toes are tingling, to totally useless in terms of consciousness. All right. And so that's what we train. We train pilots to not wait till they feel pretty good right now. As soon as you feel tingling in your fingers and of course there are other things that he doesn't know, but if you I could go back, but his lips turn blue. That's called cyanosis, where you're not getting enough oxygen. So, but again, this is what I want to drill home to you. His CO2 levels were normal because he could breathe out. He could exhale CO2, so no problem. He just wasn't getting the enough oxygen. And so, again, did he lose some brain cells? A couple, but it goes with the territory of the military. Any questions? Do you guys like that? And that's what I did for a living. And I trained thousands of pilots and astronauts and whatnot on this type of thing. So I hope you enjoyed that. Very few people get to see this. Any questions about anything that we covered today? All right, wonderful. Okay, have a great weekend. Study. Wait. No, we're doing this new thing. All right, so let's do this new thing. Like I said, I want you guys to do way better on the next two tests. So everybody got their pen and paper? Yeah. Digestive is easy breezy. I mean, this was by far the most complex thing you're going to have. Digestion is half my lecture on digestion is to bust all the myths about diet, nutrition, and all the other stupid things you'll hear on the commercials. So anyway, so let's quickly go through this, shall we? All right. Yeah, keto diet is stupid, and I'll explain that as well. Like I said, my digestion is to give you a lesson on reality. And if you want to lose weight, how you lose weight and all that other good stuff. All right. I know. Well, no, I'm going to teach you, and then you can explain that to your mom. But Christine, to be honest with you, my mom is 84 years old, and she still argues with me on physiology and nutrition and everything. And I just roll my eyes. I'm like, oh my God. She was a nurse back in 1950 before. Exactly, Christine. My mom was a nurse back in the 50s until she got pregnant with me and then quit, but she still is using her 1950 knowledge to argue with me. It's cute, but like I said, whatever. All right, so let's go through this real quick so we can wrap it up for the night. So We're not gonna. I'm gonna pick. Who am I gonna pick? Christina Bitters. What do you know for sure is going to be an essay question on the test for the respiratory system? Pay attention, everybody. We lost a couple people. That's unfortunate. Okay, no Boyle's, Dalton, and Henry's Law. Yes, very good. All right, checked off. All right, Jessica, what do you know for sure that's going to be one of the essay questions? Jessica, you with us? I think Jessica stepped out. Joshua, what do you know for sure is going to be on there? Yes, the Bohr effect. With remember, Bohr and Haldane work together. Okay, that's probably a 1-point question. Give me the big ones. Andy, give me something, Andy.
Okay, I'm going back through my notes.
All right. In the meantime, yes, the hemoglobin saturation curve. You need to know that.
Sorry, the transport and exchange of CO2.
Yes, the 3 ways we get CO2 out of the body. So yeah, carbon dioxide transport. So yes, Talani and Andy. Again, I expect you to know the percentages. 7 to 10% via dissolved in the plasma, 20% bound to hemoglobin, and the rest, 70% by bicarbonate. Okay, good. Yes, Vanessa, the hemoglobin saturation and the right shift. And explain that. All right, good. So far, okay, yes, the local changes. So the low PO2, high CO2, low PO, low pH. Yeah, good. What else? Go back a little bit earlier in our discussion yesterday or Monday. Again, all right, Daniel, we already said the Bohr and the Haldane effect working together and the partial pressure gradients. The cellular respiration equation will be on there as well as the CO2 plus H2O gives them carbonic acid. All the graphs, all right? Christine, that's a small thing, the negative pressure. That's not a big thing, all right? Epithelial changes from the nasal cavity to the alveoli. So you're going to go through those. Okay, very good. You guys are knocking the stuff out of the park. Very good. So yeah, be able to tell me that we go from pseudostratified, ciliated columnar to the nasal cavity and the nasopharynx. Yeah, we've already said cellular respiration. You guys need to be looking at the chat. All right. And then again, the changes through the bronchi and to the bronchioles and whatnot. Okay. Again, make sure you can tell me, yeah, all that stuff. Make sure you can tell me the internal and external, or I should say external and internal respiration and the partial pressures of O2 and CO2, in which direction they're going for both. All right, so you definitely need to be able to, I drew it for you. All right, tell me, the partial pressures of oxygen and CO2 in the alveoli and the diffusion across from the capillaries. And again, at the tissue level, the exchange, the partial pressures and the exchange from the capillaries to the tissues. Okay, good. What else? Somebody said all the graphs, but let's be a little bit more specific. All right. Okay. So composition of gases, O2. Well, yeah, I want you to know the partial pressures. Again, our focus will be Not so much in the atmospheric ones, but the partial pressures of gases in the lungs and the tissues. But somebody said, Vanessa said all the graphs. Which graphs? I haven't seen it, what I want to see yet. We've already talked about the hemoglobin saturation curve. Yes, that's going to be a graph. What's the other big graph? There's two other graphs. Very good, Vanessa. Respiratory volumes. Okay, the respiratory volumes. Very good. All right. And the other graph, which we already talked about, was the right shift. So I may give you CO2, pH, temperature. It's the same thing. It's a right shift. And the whole purpose of right shift is what? Somebody, real quick. What's the whole purpose of the right shift? Well, that's what the right shift happens when you exercise. What's the purpose of the right shift? Thank you, Vanessa. Excellent, Vanessa. Unload oxygen because you're exercising. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay. All right, folks. Good session. I think you nailed it all. Any questions about anything? Nothing? All right. The only thing I would add is, again, understanding how important CO2 is to your respiratory rate. Way more important than oxygen, as we just watched on my little video. Anything else? Can anybody else think of anything that would help the class? All right. Okay. We're good then. Have a great Wednesday. It is Wednesday, right? Yeah, it's Wednesday night. And please study. Please study. I want everybody to do well. You have everything in front of you, especially with this little thing. I'm hoping people took notes. So if you took notes on everybody's contribution in the chat, you should be in good shape. You should be in good shape. All right. One more time. One more time. Oh. Who do I pick on? Who do I pick on? I don't know. I picked on everybody tonight. So who's up for a question? Who's bold enough to answer a question? Wow. Not a lot of brave people out there, huh? Joshua. If I'm healthy, and I start breathing faster and deeper, how is that going to affect my O2 concentration? Beautiful. Beautiful. Excellent. God, I'm glad I got that through. Good job, Natalia and Andrea. It doesn't. All right? It doesn't. Neither does yawning. You know? All right. Conversely, Andy, if I hypoventilate, how does that affect my CO2 levels?
That would have low levels of CO2.
So if I slow down my breathing, my CO2 levels are going to be lower?
Oh, no.
Again, I want you to think about that. Remember two simple things for all of you. Inhaling is all about oxygen. Exhaling is all about getting rid of CO2. So if I slow down my breathing rate, Andy, what's going to happen to my CO2 levels?
It will increase it.
Very good.
Yeah.
will
Sorry, I
increase-
had that backwards.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm asking these questions. All right. And conversely, Natalia, if I hyperventilate, how is that going to affect my CO2 levels?
It will decrease.
It will decrease. Very good. All right. Good. All right. Okay, I think I've exhausted everything. And hopefully we've all taken that down. So again, most of this was recorded. I did not record the what we call the altitude chamber because that's technically, to be honest, it's classified. So you got to see a little bit of it, but no, you can't share that. Did everybody hear me? You can't share. I think you should feel special, Christina. So I think you saw the first minute or so before I stopped it because that's technically military classified stuff. All right. Okay, folks, have a wonderful night, and I will see you next Monday. Take care.